All right, 17 LL, Hayom Yom. The Alter Rebbe himself was a regular Torah reader. Once he was away from Liozna on the Shabbos Parshas Yisavoy, this parsha that we last just read with all the curses in it. And when he was away, the Middler Rebbe then was not yet bar mitzvah, but he was listening to the substitute Bal Koireh, learning the Torah. He heard the Torah reading from somebody else. The Middler Rebbe's anguish at the curses in the Teichacha, which is the section of admonition, Hashem is waving his finger at us, caused him so much heartache as he listened to those rebukes that on Yom Kippur, the Alter Rebbe doubted whether his son would be able to fast. It upset him so much. When they asked the Middler Rebbe, don't you hear the Parsha every year? And this didn't happen every year. He replied, yes, but when my father reads, one hears no curses. It's all in the reader. The relationship between the reader and the reading and the one hearing. Okay? Lessons in Tanya. Starting a new letter here on page 248. And lessons in Likutei Amorim, page Chuf Chuf Aleph, 121. It's a shame not more people are here because this is a extremely fundamental, basic letter that explains the basics, the 10 spheros, which emanate from Hashem, which we call filling all worlds. What are the spheros and how they work to enliven creation, to bring creation about. It kind of follows on where we were before, speaking about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we said on Friday, in the end of the Shabbos' letter, that on Rosh Hashanah, the life force of the entire worlds, from Atzilus all down, is renewed. And when we're talking about life force, which brings renewal into the creation, we're talking about that whole basket of light, which we call Mamali Kol Almin, filling all worlds. And he says it starts in Chokhmah. That's his line. The beginning of everything starts in Chokhmah Elah. And each and every month, a new flow comes down from Chokhmah Elah, into the worlds through the vehicles of the 10 Sephiros, which we will now explain in a fairly lengthy letter, a short piece today, but it's a fairly lengthy letter, about the understanding the 10 Sephiros. So he begins, Perek 15, page Chuf Chuf Aleph. L'havin mashal umalitza divrei chachomim. To understand the metaphor and the allegory, that's the first thing to understand. These spheros, they're a metaphorical, when we speak about the 10 spheros, and particularly when we speak about their reflection in the body, the 10 powers. So these is all metaphors. We're learning. Sphera is, he's not going to say this here, but in another place, in Sefer Yetzirah, from Avram Avinu, it gives definition of sphera. The word sphera is from a few words. One is sefer, which means to count, like number, sipor, to count. So it's a way of analyzing the process of creation by pointing out, designating each of the 10 and its characteristics, to count them and give definition to each and every one of them. These lights that Hashem, the word light itself is, of course, a metaphor. Hashem isn't beaming light. Light is a metaphor for godly energy. And also, Sphira is Lashon, like we say, Sefer, a sefer, a book, Sipur, a story. So the Spheros tell the story of how Hashem creates everything. And the last definition, actually, Alter Rebbe does bring this, but not here, is Lashon Saphir, like a sapphire in English, which emanates light. So these are all metaphors for the process of Hashem creating. So these are mashal, umalitza, allegory. To understand these mashalim, these allegorical, metaphorical illusions of our sages, divrei chachamim, of the words of the wise one, the chidusam and their riddles, the way they spoke in riddle and understand what that means. We'll understand this be'inyan hasfiros, to understand this as it pertains to the spheros. Midoy zois. This is known be'oretz. This is known in the earth. The pikaj kadaishi elyon nishmasam elyon. From the mouths of the holy ones, the supernal holy ones whose souls are in Eden. These are the predecessors to the Alter Rebbe, going back all the way to those who received and then articulated one measure after another, the Kabbalah, so that we have a Masorah. We have a Masorah from the time of Adam Arishon. We have a Masorah, an oral tradition, which has taught us the inner workings of reality in terms of how the spheros, what the spheros are, and how they interact with each other. The Karav Ketzas Elasecho, and the point of this letter is to bring all of that close, a little bit close to our understanding, based on Maida Kasiv, based on what is written in Iyov, Job. Job says a pasuk. He says, "Ubesore exa elaka." From my flesh I can see godliness. So the general meaning of that is that we are built in Hashem's image, and just as Hashem himself, of course, has no image, we're built in the image that Hashem projects, which is the image of the 10 spheres, sometimes called the supernal man, because the spheres are aligned with the body parts of a human. The head is Chabad, and then you have Hagas, the heart, the middle part of the body, and the key, the lower part of the body. And Job said, from the way I'm constructed, I can metaphorically understand something about the way Hashem, so-called, constructs himself in his role of creating the worlds. From my flesh I can see godliness. Shahakavana, the Alter Rebbe says, Job's kavana in saying this is lahavan katzatz elakusa yisborach men nefesh hamelubeshes b'basar odom, is to bring a little bit close the topic of godliness, may he be blessed, from understanding the way the soul invests itself in a person. So in the analog, the soul is the source of life of the physical body. Hashem is the soul of everything. He emanates forces, he emanates energies which become the inspiration, and the life force, and the materialization of all of creation. So that's analogous. He himself is analogous to the soul in the body, and just like the soul radiates from it powers of Chabad, head powers, Hagas, heart, and lower body, and just as he does that, so just as the soul does that, so in that same way, there's an expression actually from Chazal, just as he fills the worlds, just like the neshama fills the body, Hashem fills the worlds. So we'll understand a little bit about this. Now, I said this is an extremely fundamental treatise, this letter on understanding the 10 spheros, which is one of the basic foundations to understanding Chassidus. So we'll understand this Al Pi Maimon Zal, according to our sages said in the Gemara Brochas. On the pasuk, David HaMelech says, "Borchi nafshi, borchi nafshi es Hashem." My soul blesses Hashem, and he goes on and says, "B'kol kirbi," and all my innards bless His holy name. All my guts, he says, right? Borchi, not my soul, and all my guts bless Hashem. Okay? And from this, the Gemara expresses a meaning of this as follows. Ma HaKodesh Baruch Hu mola es ha'olam. Those last words are not here. Just like Hashem fills the worlds. Those words are not in the Tanya. But that's how it goes. Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu mola es ha'olam. Just as Hashem fills the worlds, af neshama, so the neshama fills the body. So by understanding the way we're constructed, we can understand how Hashem constructs everything. The 10 powers that we have reflect the 10 spheros. And according to the saying of the Zohar on the Pasuk, we're also going to use to understand the 10 spheros, this expression from Sefer Bereshis, where it says in Sefer Bereshis, V'yipach be'apov nishmas chayim. He blew a living soul into us. When he created man, the first human, from which all other humans derive, it says, V'yipach be'apov. He blew into his nostrils the soul, a living soul. Now, Adam was made by carving out a shape of that Hashem wanted in the earth, but the earth is a daimon. The earth is silent. The earth has no expressed vitality. So the vitality, the life force that's going to take this inanimate dirt and enliven it is the soul. And Hashem metaphorically blew the soul into us. And the Zohar says, Man de nafak, when a person blows, whoever blows, from his very deep innards he blows. All right, so this is a first clue. The neshama is going to enliven the body, and the neshama is going to divide itself or express itself better in terms of 10 koichos. Hashem is enlivening the worlds, but it's not Hashem's essence. It's these are what enlivens the worlds are 10 expressions of Hashem, which we call the 10 spheros. But inside of those 10 spheros, motivating them at their origin, is he blew from himself. And this is how, in the sense that we say, Hashem himself is invested in the 10 spheros. Just in an analogy for that is like the neshama is invested in the body. It says the neshama is the life force of that clump of dirt. Hashem himself is the life force of all the worlds, but the materialization or the actualization of all the worlds is through 10 instruments, which are embedded within each of those 10 spheros is Hashem himself. Because when a person blows, he blows from his very innerness. Even a soul from the lowest world, the poor world of Asiya, which is the world we're in, but even a soul which originates in the world of Asiya, comes from a union of the midos. If the soul down here is a manifestation of creation, all manifestations of creation are directly rooted in the sphere of Malchus. Malchus, the bottom of the 10 spheros. Malchus, that's kingship. Kingship is the ability, this is Rosh Hashanah, when we crown the king, as we learned on Shabbos. Malchus. Malchus is the proximate source of everything. The whole kingdom depends on Malchus. That's the metaphor. The whole kingdom, which is creation, that's the kingdom. And our whole engagement with the world depends on the sphere of Malchus. But Malchus is not standing alone. Malchus is the bottom of a heap, which receiving from above, and the proximate source of Malchus are the midos, which is the Zohar and Chesed on the right side, and Gevura on the left side, and they're flowing downward through Netzach, Hod, Yesod, finally into Malchus. So even a soul down here in this lower world, the Malchus of this lower world is infused with Zun, which is masculine and feminine, which is Chesed and Gevura, right and left. And we could talk about why it's masculine and feminine on the side if you want to deal with that. And those midos themselves receive from the seichel, right, the head, without the brain, there's nothing going on in the body, because the brain, as we learned in the first part of Tanya, is the residence of the nefesh elokis, the soul, which is going to enliven the intellectual faculties and ultimately the spiritual and holy faculties of a person, is in the head. And the top of the head is Chabad, right? On the top of the head, the first of the midos in the head is Chokhmah. And Chokhmah is connected with the ayin, with the ineffable above it. So that ineffable above it, that life force which is uncontainable, gets contained, there's a little paradox, gets contained in Chokhmah. And from Chokhmah, it flows down throughout the rest of the system in a vertical way, like a waterfall, down into Zun, into the heart, and then down into the power of deed, which is the power of Malchus, as kingship, the effective, where the king becomes effective and walks his talk, so to speak, gives his edicts, and everything moves according to that. So even a soul of Asiya is informed with all of that flow which I just described. And that flow comes down through all the worlds, from the highest world of Atzilus all the way down through Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, down to the bottom, into Zun, into the Midos of the Asiya. And the brains of that, which are, right, the central intelligence agency of the human, which is the brains and the intellect. So the brains are like, right, we have levels in the soul. We have the bottom level, the action level of the soul is called nefesh. The spiritual level of the soul, or the intellectual level of the soul, is called neshama. Nefesh, it's called, the bottom of the soul, the action of the soul is nefesh. The emotional part of the soul is ruach, and then the intellectual part is neshama. So from the top down, head down, is neshama, ruach is the spirit in the heart, and then the action is with the legs and the lower part of the body. That's the nefesh. But above it are higher powers, which are bechinas chaya. These are the more, what they call them, makiftika, transcendent powers. So the intellect is where the transcendent powers are get infused into the immanent powers. And what we're mainly describing here is the immanent powers, from Chokhmah on Das, the Chokhmah on down, because related back to our Maimon, our letter in Rosh Hashanah, there's a new infusion of all of this in the worlds through the Chokhmah, coming from Chokhmah of the Eibishter, down into all the worlds. So the worlds are being renewed through the same Seder, through the same order, that each and every moment we are operating from our Chokhmah informing our heart, and our heart informing our deed. So these are the brains. They are the levels of Chaya and Neshama, levels here, as in Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chai. So the brains are the Chaya, the enlivening for, and they become the soul of the Midos, which the Midos are below it, and Azun, the seven Midos. Shehein hein achirayim the kelim the Zun. And what gets active in the, so you have here a structure which he hasn't mentioned before, lights and vessels. Light is the energy, vessel is the container. And the simplest way I've always explained this is this light that's in front of me. In order for it to shine, it needs two things. It needs electricity, that's the light, that's the energy, but it also needs a vessel for that electricity to contain it. So every sphera is a combination of lights and vessels, otherwise it can't be active. Energy without a vessel is useless, and the vessel without the light, without the energy, is useless. So as it comes down here, this energy from Seichel, which is further sourced up higher than Seichel in the transcendent levels, comes down and down and down into the kelim of Zun, to the vessels of our midos. In other words, we'll take Chesed. Every midah is composed of a light and a vessel. There's the Or Chesed, which is the light of Chesed, and then there's the keli, the vessel of Chesed to contain it. And now you have an operating Chesed. So that's the idea of the energy coming down into vessels. And these are the vessels of Zun, of the Midos, of Atzilus. We're talking the flow of, now we're talking godliness. Same thing occurs in our body. The Seichel gets, the light of Chokhmah gets contained in the vessel of Chokhmah. Or let's put it this way, simply, the light of Chabad, all the intellectual faculties, energies, get contained in the brain. The brain is the vessel, the container for the energies of Chabad. But and then correspondingly, as we said, from my flesh I can see God. Correspondingly, in the cosmos that God creates, these midos are infused with an energetic, and so now you have a sphera, and the externality of that sphera is what activates. It's the keli, without again the light bulb. It's the keli, which is it's the bulb. Which I'm going to go out and buy bulbs. I'm not going to go out and buy light. So the externality is the encasement, and that's what's enlivening and bringing the energy into, in the light notion of Seichel, into the Midos, and in the worlds from the Godhead, Chokhmah, into all of creation. And this is the flow of Elikus, Shehem Elikus Mamish. And this combo of of energy and vessels, as they come down and down, and then the externality of one becomes the internality of another. This is also called Seder HaHistalshelus, by the way, and it's called Seder HaHistalshelus because Histalshelus is a chain, interlinking chain. So here's my sphere on top of the sphere. Here's the bottom, and the bottom of this sphere connects with the top of the other, and in a repetitious way recapitulates, and that's called Seder HaHistalshelus, which is another name for what we're describing here, which is the construction of the Or Mamali, the light that fills all worlds. And in those spheros, in these little spheres, right, these little spheres of energy and vessels, godliness is contained in them. Shehem Elikus Mamish. There are Mamish. Now we're talking spheros, the way that he creates the world. They are Mamish Elikus, as we said before. That even Chokhmah gets an infusion from the ayin, the high transcendent level, and that infusion of ayin, which we call the Or Ein Sof, it gets more contained and more contained and more contained, but it's present everywhere. So this is Elikus Mamish, Shebetoicham, which within each and every sphere, the Elikus Mamish, Meir Or Ein Sof, is radiating in the Elikus, which is the Elikus, which is the godliness of the manifestation of the spheros. There radiates the Or Ein Sof, Baruch Hu, Hamalubish, Veganuz, Bechokmah, which is enclosed and concealed in Chokhmah. There's a pasuk, Chokhmah me'ayin timotzeh. It's a question. The literal words mean wisdom. Where will you find it? Me'ayin, from where will you find it? And Chassidus darshans it. Chokhmah. You want to know what Chokhmah is? Chokhmah is the emergence of the first something, me'ayin, from the ayin, which is the ineffable above it. And now it's a statement. This instantiation of a sphera called Chokhmah, with its particular qualities, Chokhmah, me'ayin timotzei. It comes, it's found, its origin from where it's found is from the ayin. So the Ein Sof comes down and infuses this, put it this way in English, the infinite now gets contained in something finite, or the uninstantiable, the unrealizable, the unmaterial, the non-material gets materialized, although this is not a physical thing, this is just a metaphor, gets materialized in Chokhmah. So Chokhmah contains the ayin, and therefore the Ein Sof itself infuses all the spheros, and the neshama itself. The neshama is a chelek elokah. It's infused with infinity, with godliness, and that infinity, if you can say such a thing, gets encapsulated in a thing which we call the neshama, and that infusion of elikus, of infinity, permeates every single corpuscle and every single cell of our human organism. But it's hidden. right? We don't see the Or Ein Sof, but that is the ultimate power that's enlivening us. However, it's, in the words, but back to, it's the Or Ein Sof Baruch Hu Hamalubish Veganus, enclosed and concealed, starting with the sphere of Chachma, of Atzilus. Then, as the Zohar says, the Ihu V'Gramehi Chad Be'Atzilus. In Atzilus, the vessels, the light bulbs, are so rarefied, so thin, their presence, their substantiality. I mean, this is Atzilus, they're not really physically substantial, but the sense of the Keli is so thin that the light and the vessels are one. It can become, as the Zohar says, he and his Kelim, he and his vessels, he and his lights are one in the world of Atzilus. There isn't very much thickening yet of the Keli. The thickening, the gradual thickening, which we call Tzimtzum, gets thicker and thicker and thicker as we go down. And the Or Ein Sof becomes more and more concealed, but present and acting, but in a concealed way. But in Atzilus, there's very little separation. They're chad. V'al kain, and therefore, gam b'neshamas ha'odam, that therefore, as a result of the containment of the Ein Sof in something, let's put it this way, the containment in something which has no end, in something which does has an end, meaning a sphera, an object which is defined, sphera also, round, a circle, and it has a conscription. It has this is the space of the circle, and outside of that, there is not the space of the circle. But the Ein Sof, which is outside of that space of the circle, is injected into that circle at the place of Chokhmah. So Al-Kain, therefore, Gam in the Shomas Ha'odam, Meir Ein Sof Baruch Hu, there shines in the soul of a person, there radiates the Or Ein Sof Baruch Hu, Malubish V'Ganis Be'er Chokhmah, which is enclosed and concealed in the light of Chokhmah, Sheba, of the soul, L'Hachyes Es Ha'odam, to enliven the person, Umemena, and from this, Yochel Ha'odam L'Hoven Ketzatz, and from what we've just said, and he's going to say more, a lot more. This letter goes on and on. But from what we just said, so if we've picked it up the way he has intended us to pick it up, Yochel ha'odam lahavin, a person can understand a little bit, ketzatz, a little bit, the spheros halyonis, about the supernal spheros. Shekula me'iris v'nishmasoi. All the supernal spheros radiate in a person's soul. Hakalula mahen, which the person's soul is an all-inclusiveness, a container for the 10 spheros. And that's where today's Tanya stops, but this will go on. So, as I said earlier, when there were far fewer people here, very fundamental letter, because the notion of 10 spheros and how they interact with each other is a key and very often a reference topic in Hasidus. And to know, and this is now it becomes our bechein, or what I could say, what a bechein, to know, therefore, so what? The big so what is that our power, 10 powers, which enliven us and without which we're nothing, and the way we are designed, we're designed to reflect that same infusion of Ein Sof in something which is limited, and not just to reflect it, but to act. Our actuality, he just told us, our souls are infused with the Ein Sof, with the power of infinity. And as a result, that's what we talked about before, when we were talking about going out of yourself to give tzedakah, is because there's a wellspring of infinite energy and infinite capability within each one of us to be tapped, only to be tapped and to brought into action. So I'll shut my mouth for a bit. Any comments? Any questions? Well, as I say, this is very importantly fundamental. No questions?
I have one. Good morning.
Good morning.
In terms of Kesser, then,
Hmm.
how does that that hasn't been discussed at all.
You're right, because Keser is in a realm above the 10 spheros. The 10 spheros don't include Keser. So you want to briefly to touch on that?
I would, yeah, just quickly, please.
Okay. All right. All right. I think the easiest way, or the one that's in front of my mind, because we're learning more about Rosh Hashanah, is the king, right? Rosh Hashanah is the time when we coronate the king. We put the crown on the king. The king himself, like any human being, begins with the head, seichel, right? Chochmah Chabad, over here. Okay, now we'll take the human analog, which I just actually relearned in a mimer that I was learning. The human analog for Keser is the skull. The brain is Chabad, right? The soft tissue. But above it is this hard thing, which we generally just think of as a bone, but it's the Galgalta, it's in Aramaic, it's the skull, which is Keser. It sits above the brain. Just like a crown, it's not part of the organism of the king and sits above it, yet it's not until you crown the king that the king can actualize himself as king. A king without a crown is not yet a king. You need the coronation. So, in our discussion today, I've been mentioning, the Alter Rebbe has been telling us that the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, gets invested in the brain of the universe, which is Chachma, right? That which he's been referring to as that stuff above the Ein Sof, which gets injected into Sof, the infinite, which gets injected into finite starting in Chachma, that's the crown. That's the Keser. That's the Or HaSoivid. It's not part of the organism, but it's responsible ultimately. See, these are layers. It'll start, if Chochmah is responsible for the Seichel for the heart, and on down, so also above. What gives activity to Chochmah? It's the Keser. And in Keser itself, there are layers and layers and layers, upward and upward, until you get to the essence of God himself. But the Keser, as I said, is not part of the body. It's infused through Chochmah. Chochmah me'ayin. Keser is also called the ayin. In that phrase, that sentence I use, Chochmah me'ayin timotze, and making a statement. Chochmah comes from the ayin. The ayin is the Keser.
Okay.
That help?
That helps. Yeah, that's what I was figuring, that it had to come through the Keser.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Keser is here in our thought is the metaphor for the infinite light that has to become somehow finitized. And that beginning of it becoming finite is in the sphere of Chochmah. And then it infuses down all to the other finite or measurable, definable spheros.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anybody else while we were talking about that? Anybody else got anything to bring up? So with our infinite light invested in us, let us get on with our day. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.